Cool. So now I believe I'll begin explaining today's program, introducing myself, getting into the logistics so that we can start presentations before 1/4 and then hopefully finish in around 90 minutes. For those of you just joining, my name is Sara Katona. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am a member of the Socialist Party USA and specifically a part of the anti-war working group, which is hosting today's event, The Conflict in Yemen, Why It Must Stop. Joining us today are Hassan ElTayyab and Dr. Aisha Jumaan, whom I will introduce more thoroughly in a few minutes. I'll be summarizing the Socialist Party's position on Yemen, introduce and welcome Hassan to present, then introduce Dr. Jumaan. Questions will be asked at the end. So if I could ask viewers, please use the Q&A button on your screens to ask questions rather than the chat, and feel free to ask them at any point, although they will be addressed after both presentations. So again, type the questions at any time in the Q&A, just know that they won't be answered until the end. So on to the Socialist Party. The Socialist Party asserts that socialist solidarity extends past family, friends, local, regional, and state community. It does not acknowledge arbitrary borders and does not subdivide into race, creed, and color. Compassion, empathy, and respect are the foundations of a socialist solidarity which discriminates only between dominated and dominator, exploiter and exploited. It is in the name of a capitalist status quo that the USA has involved itself in war crimes and crimes against humanity in Yemen. The USA spends billions of dollars a year in the Middle East and has yet to secure peace. But of course, critics of this statement's condemnation will point to the Biden administration's recent pause of USA weapons sales to Gulf Cooperation Council members, GCC countries. They may claim that a new era of foreign policy is here, with Secretary of State Antony Blinken at the fore. Aside from a coat of blue paint, nothing has fundamentally changed. In short, Blinken and Biden supported the 2003 invasion of Iraq and 2011 Libyan intervention. It should also be said that a reiteration of the Obama administration's foreign policy is not progress. The Obama admin was responsible for atrocities such as the strikes on a Yemeni wedding and Kunduz Trauma Center in Afghanistan. It will not be Biden's administration which ends them unless it is given a clear, direct, and unavoidable message from citizens of the USA. To substantiate this, we only have to look at Thursday's ordered airstrikes, which were made without congressional approval. The consequences of the USA's imperialism and military-industrial complex should not fall on people of any continent, and this stance does not require backing a government. The Socialist Party does not align with any nation, but aligns universally with working people. Conflict and war consolidate power for the minority, undermine the stability of daily life, and turn resources which could alleviate social justice issues into resources which cause social issues. So thank you. And now, Hassan ElTayyab is the Legislative Manager for Middle East Policy for the Friends Committee on National Legislation. Prior to joining FCNL, he was co-director of the National Advocacy Group, Just Foreign Policy, where he led their lobbying work to advance a more progressive foreign policy in the Middle East and Latin America. His writings and commentaries have been featured in numerous news outlets, including BBC World News, Al Jazeera, and the Huffington Post. So feel free to begin now, Hassan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sara, and good to be with you, Aisha, and good to be with everybody here at this great event. Happy to talk about Yemen. A lot of you have probably been following what's been going on in the news, but I'd like to just give a little bit more background, talk about some of the major risk factors we're seeing, and also give folks some tools to be able to advocate with their members of Congress and make sure that, you know, they're doing the right things and saying the right things so we can indeed end this horrible conflict. Since its start, the Saudi UAE-led coalition's war has received almost unwavering military support and weapon sales from the United States, the UK, France, and other Western countries, and even Canada. In 2015, the U.S. accommodated Saudi Arabia's request for military backing of their coalition's war on Yemen, and we agreed to provide targeting assistance, logistical support for airstrikes, mid-air refueling for Saudi warplanes, spare parts transfers, and billions of dollars in weapon sales. The coalition's it really has an unconscionable record of indiscriminately attacking civilians through this war, and they've bombed tens of thousands of civilians. They've destroyed civilian infrastructure, hospitals, schools, refugee camps, weddings. They destroyed a school bus filled with 40 children in August 2018. They've attacked sewage treatment plants and markets. In addition, the Saudi coalition's blockade on Yemen has also played a major impact and restricted the flow of food, fuel, and medicine into the country. As a result of this war, 16 million people have been pushed close to the brink of famine. The UN is warning that 2.3 million children under the age of 5 right now are suffering from what's called acute malnutrition. And then almost 500,000 children of that group, the under 5, are suffering from severe acute malnutrition and could potentially die and suffer from long-term illness because of this horrible condition and the lack of food. So it goes without saying, humanitarian aid work right now is essential. There are 4 million people internally displaced in Yemen. 80% of the country, of the approximately 30 million people that live there, rely on some form of food assistance for survival. And unfortunately, at a time of untold human suffering, the former Trump administration in March 2020 last year, they made dramatic cuts to humanitarian aid to Yemen, which are still in place. And this includes a suspension of $73 million in USAID funding to Houthi-controlled areas in northern Yemen, where 80% of the population lives. And to make matters worse, those cuts occurred alongside, funding cuts to WHO, World Food Program, and the reduction or closing of 3/4 of all the UN programs. Congress, and many of you worked on this, and I really appreciate that. Congress has worked tirelessly to invoke the War Powers Resolution, reassert their congressional war authority, and voted with the Yemen War Powers Resolution to end U.S. support for the Saudi UAE-led war in Yemen. They've put different amendments, or tried to put different amendments, into the National Defense Authorization Act, DoD appropriations. And bipartisan majorities of Congress even voted to block weapon sales to Saudi Arabia and the UAE over concerns about, the way Saudi Arabia was conducting the war in Yemen, striking civilian targets, transferring U.S. weapons into the hands of Al-Qaeda affiliates like AQAP, and just, horrible human rights record. There have indeed been promising policy changes, since the start of the Biden administration, including an end to U.S. military participation and weapon sales, and a pause in weapon sales for offensive operations in the Saudi UAE-led war in Yemen. They appointed Tim Lenderking as U.S. envoy to Yemen to help with diplomacy. It's also welcome news that the State Department lifted the FTO, or the Foreign Terrorist Organization designations, on the Houthis, which would have been disastrous for humanitarian aid delivery. So those are all really positive things. Unfortunately, there's, much to be desired, much, that we need to still push for. And we still don't know a lot about what they exactly mean by offensive or defensive weapons and military support. Does that include any military support for the Saudi blockade on Yemen? Does that include spare parts transfers? Are there certain circumstances that we would be able to, that we would be supplying support for offensive operations, under the guise that this was a defensive maneuver to block the Houthis? So there's a lot of questions that still remain. We're working with members of Congress right now to ask those important questions. And Ro Khanna's office, who led the Yemen War Powers Resolution in the House, he recently issued a 41-member letter to the Biden administration asking all these clarifying questions. Now, Another piece that hasn't been reversed, and I think is really critical, is that the aid suspension that was put in place under Trump, and they cited Houthi obstruction as the main reason for this aid suspension of Houthis taking resources from the aid operations, and they kept that suspension in place. And we're really worried, and Aisha and I have been doing a lot of advocacy work right now on the Hill, and to the administration, urging that they restore all humanitarian funding to all parts of Yemen in advance of the March 1 donor summit, which is coming, next week. It's coming tomorrow. And the UN is trying to raise $3.8 billion this year to be able to cover, all the humanitarian aid operations in Yemen. I think it's really critical. Last year, they had a $1.9 billion funding shortfall, and that cut off really important humanitarian aid operations in large parts of the country. So we have to do what we need to do, pressure our lawmakers. I'll put some links in the chat that will help with all this when I'm done with the presentation. And so anyway, lots of push there. So Aisha and I, we recently presented to the administration, and I'm going to tell you all what we told the Biden administration, folks at USAID, State Department, National Security Council. There were folks from the FBI Human Rights Division there. And we identified 4 main atrocity risk factors, including violence, famine, disease, and internal displacement. So, as far as violence is concerned, 230,000 people have been killed since the start of the war to 2019. So this isn't even the full range, but that's a huge number, including 18,500 civilians from airstrikes. And the risk factors are airstrikes, the blockade, and any ongoing military support from international actors like the US, UK, France, Canada, any participation in the airstrikes, logistical support, or spare parts transfers. So we're definitely advocating to end that. The solutions are disengaging militarily by cutting off the U.S. participation. We've made some progress there. We still need to keep going. And to support diplomacy through, UN-led peace talks, and advocate for a more balanced UN Security Council resolution to replace the original one passed in 2015, 2216. And, we want that more balanced UN Security Council resolution to not just be focused against the Houthis. And it was basically written by Saudi Arabia, as Aisha has reminded me so many times, and make sure it calls for a nationwide ceasefire, an end to the blockade, an end to obstruction of humanitarian aid, and an end to any type of military support or weapon sales to any of the warring parties, not just the Houthis. And I think that's, and also work to encourage all the parties to, support dialogue and diplomacy to resolve the conflict, because that's ultimately the only answer here, is to end the war. And I think that's really important, because the U.S. can do everything we can, but the U.K. has just approved a weapons sale to Saudi Arabia. So I think, pushing on this and pushing on international actors is really critical. Famine disease is another huge part of the issue here, and just breaks our hearts to see what's happening to the people of Yemen right now, in large part because of U.S. complicity for so long. Over 16 million people are living on the brink of famine. And I mentioned the UN stats about, children under 5 experiencing, severe acute malnutrition, which is, totally preventable with humanitarian aid, with, opening up the country, ending the restrictions on Sana'a airport, ending the restrictions on Hodeidah, and making sure that food and medicine can get in. So really critical. There's over 2 million cases of cholera. The COVID numbers are not really well known in the north or the south, but we do know that Yemen suffers the highest rate of fatality in the world from coronavirus. And the continuing risk factors are the air, land, and sea blockade that's cut off the flow of food and medicine, and fuel even, which has reduced the capacity of hospitals from being able to operate as much as they need to. And there's also been 50% of the hospitals have been closed or destroyed due to the war and the fighting. Humanitarian obstruction by all parties is a major concern. The destruction of food sources that from Saudi airstrikes, agricultural infrastructure, sewage treatment plants, these are all exacerbating famine and disease in the country. And our main ask right now on this front is to get the administration to restore humanitarian aid to all parts of Yemen in advance of this March 1 donor summit. I'll also mention internal displacement. 3.6 million Yemenis are internally displaced because of the fighting. And Aisha's group, Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation, which I hope folks can learn more about the work she's doing. Their org works a lot with people, that have been internally displaced in Yemen. I think, they go to places where a lot of other aid workers don't. So supporting people like Aisha and her organization is really critical right now. But also, working to end the conflict, end U.S. complicity, support a more balanced UN Security Council resolution are all things that we can do. I think, it's important to kind of look at the history and how we got here for a solution to go forward. And I'm going to lay out a few policy things and pass the mic over to Aisha so she can finish up. I think we really need to take a lesson from the last major diplomatic success in Yemen. After Houthis took control of Sana'a in 2014, Yemen's warring political factions began an internal Yemeni dialogue led by Jamal Ben Omar, the former UN envoy to Yemen, and they were on the verge of a power-sharing deal. In Ben Omar's latest op-ed, he said he was completely shocked that Saudi Arabia began dropping bombs on Sana'a while he was still on a diplomatic mission for the UN and so close to a peace dialogue. So, what I think I learned there, and what I've learned from the start, is that foreign military intervention and the blockade are disrupting the country of Yemen, perpetuating the violence. And so what we need to do is end military complicity from all sides, push on, the US and allies like the UK, France, push on Saudi Arabia and the UAE. We can own our side of the street because we live in the United States, and we can put pressure on our elected officials. So I would highlight that as a really major thing that we can all push for, is a new UN Security Council resolution. We can potentially even attach that to the State Department authorizing bill and directing the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas Greenfield, who just got nominated and is representing the U.S. at the UN. We can direct her through the State Department authorizing bill to support a new UN Security Council resolution. So that's something that FCNL is going to be working on a lot. And Congress needs to be a part of this conversation. I think it's critical that we also, in this year's National Defense Authorization Act, push on our lawmakers to permanently end U.S. support and weapon sales for the Saudi war in Yemen. Executive orders are really flimsy. Biden could decide tomorrow, I'm not saying he will, but decide tomorrow that, we're going to start selling weapons to Saudi Arabia and the UAE. We think that's really important. And without Congress, there's nothing that we can really do about it. So Congress can legislate a permanent end to these things through these must-pass vehicles, and I suggest that we, as a community, work on it together and support each other in this advocacy work. So regional and international actors must stop fueling the war and instead work to support a ceasefire agreement that includes all Yemeni parties. We need to restore and expand humanitarian aid. Our lawmakers can put pressure on Saudi Arabia and the UAE to pay their fair share and pay to help support reconstruction. I think we've made a lot of progress. I think the folks like Aisha and Yemeni activists around the country, DSA, USA Socialist, faith leaders all over have, really moved the entire conversation. So I'm not giving credit to the Biden administration for ending support for the war. I'm giving credit to the activists that have been out there in the streets, in congressional offices, sending emails, writing op-eds, LTEs, and tweets, making this a mainstream issue. And we've done a lot of work together. And I think that's, that really is highlights the power of advocacy, and I hope we can continue working together on this. I'm going to pass it off to either Sara or Aisha to speak next, and I'll drop a couple of the links I mentioned in the chat now if folks want to check it out.
All righty. So thank you very much, Hassan. Again, viewers, please type your questions into the Q&A. We had some really great ones so far, as you have them, and we'll get to them in the end. So we will jump to our next presentation. I'm looking forward to a great conversation at the end. Dr. Aisha Jumaan, who has over 30 years of experience in public health, including viral vaccines, preventable diseases, cervical and breast cancer research, maternal and child health and nutrition. She's worked with numerous institutions, whether governmental, higher education, charitable organizations, including CDC, UNPF, UNDP, and is currently the president of the Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation.
Thank you, Sara, and thank you, Hassan. I'm happy to be with everybody here today. Unfortunately, I'll be talking about something that's heartbreaking for me personally, but also I know for a lot of people. Hassan, for example, has been an amazing advocate for Yemen and has done a lot of work to bring the voices of the Yemeni people, especially to our elected officials. I always like to start my presentation with a view of Sana'a, where I grew up. This is the most beautiful city in the world, as far as I'm concerned. It's a UNESCO heritage site. It's the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world as well. And even this beautiful city has been bombed. So I'll go over a lot of what Hassan talked about and some more, but I like to have presentations. So this is the key figures about Yemen. 24 million people are in need of some assistance. 14.3 are in need of immediate assistance. And then we have about 4 million people who are internally displaced. If we look at the age group of people who are in need between 2017 and 2021, we see an increase. Whether we are talking about children less than 5, we have 12.4 million children today who are in need of help. And then the 24 million is overall. This is what Hassan mentioned in terms of malnutrition or food insecurity. I wanted to show the map between October, December of 2020, where there were 13.5 million people who are in need of food, and projections from January to June, that increased to 16.2 million people. If you look at the map of Yemen, you see that there isn't an area in Yemen that is not experiencing food insecurity. And most of them are at crisis, emergency, and famine level. This is from a recent publication by the UN, actually, and it's basically saying from the field, millions of Yemeni facing a death sentence. Because when they talk about food insecurity, when they talk about malnutrition, especially in categories 4 and 5, like Hassan mentioned, the 400,000 kids, a lot of them are going to die in a matter of weeks or months. I just want to focus on this, on the 60, the people who are in emergency and catastrophe. We have in last year 3.6 million in emergency and 16,500 in catastrophe. That had increased to 5 million in emergency and 47,000 in catastrophe. People in catastrophe, 25% of them will die, as I said, in a matter of weeks. If we look at nutrition, this is December for kids under 5. There are 325,000 children under 5 who are experiencing severe acute malnutrition. These kids are not just gonna, have a high risk of dying, but they also have a very high risk of cognitive development. If we look at what UNA Chief Mark Lowcock said about these issues in Yemen, he said, Yemen is speeding towards the worst famine the world has seen in decades. Again, 16 million people in Yemen were going hungry, and 5 million of those are just one step away from famine. 400,000 children under the age of 5 are severely malnourished. those children are in their last weeks and months. They are starving to death. And here I need to say that they are being starved to death by the blockade and by the complicity of the international agents, organizations, or countries. This is from February of this year. Acute malnutrition threatens half of children under 5 in Yemen, which is really, it's very depressing to read, especially as we know these kids will continue, if they survive, will continue to have problems throughout their lives. So if we look at factors impacting population's health, and Hassan said blockade and airstrikes, I'll go through some examples of that. This is from 2019, Yemen under siege. I like the word siege because that is really what Yemen is under. People talk about a blockade. And if we think of siege about in the Middle Ages, when there were wars and they will besiege the country until people run out of food and they die, that's exactly what is being done to Yemen right now. Yemen is being besieged. And the hope is that people are going to be starving, or at least give in to the Saudi-led coalition. If we look at fuel imports into Yemen, you will see that the red line is what gets into Yemen. And this line here, the gray line, is what Yemen needs. So from January 1, 2020 to January 21, you see that Yemen receives most of the time less than what they need. And in June, for example, they received 1% of what Yemen needs. And January of this year is 15% of what Yemen needs. That basically, it destroys everything that needs fuel in Yemen, whether we're talking about health services, water plants, sewage plants, that, you know, that choking on fuel imports is very adversely affecting the population health and the population in general. This is from the current UN envoy to Yemen, Griffith. He said, I'm deeply concerned by the worsening situation of fuel shortages in area controlled by Ansar Allah in Yemen. The UN's position is consistent. It's essential that all obstacles to the entry and domestic distribution of fuel and other imports vital for civilians be removed. However, they've been saying that since 2015, and that has not improved. And as Hassan said, without our advocacy, without people speaking up, nothing will change. This is an example of fuel ships that get diverted to Jeddah port after they get UN certification to get into Yemen. They get diverted and they can stay up to a year in Saudi ports before they're allowed entry into Yemen. And when they are diverted, what that means that Yemenis have to pay fines, because these ships, when they stay for a long time and not being used, we accumulate fines and the Yemeni people have to pay the fines for them. So there is a ship that's called Moria. It was held for 260 days and it accumulated fines of $3.9 million. This is a recent publication also. It says February 16, fuel shortages worsens, Yemeni bakers return to firewood. Think also of all the environmental issues that Yemen will have to grapple with, not just because of the airstrikes and all the ammunition that are being dropped on the country, but also because people are resorting to using coal and wood for cooking. This is another one that shows the prices of fuel that gets into Yemen. This is the yellow line is the prices before the Saudi interventions in Yemen and the airstrikes. And you can see that all the time after that, the prices have gone to between 100% to 200%. This is showing food imports to Yemen. And again, Yemen would need 350,000 tons. This is in the gray line. A lot of the times early last year, we see that Yemen got less than what it needed. Sometimes they will increase, but the issue here is we are dependent on what the Saudi are allowing into Yemen. So, and that should not be the case. No other country should determine what other countries' food imports, medicine imports, fuel import, and essential goods should be. And this is, again, this is this siege mentality. This shows the price of food that had, as a result of the blockade on Yemen, food prices have increased to about 156%. This is problematic, especially in a country that has, the economy had been destroyed because of the blockade. And so we have less money for people to spend, and the prices of essential goods like food are going up. This just shows a big picture from 2015 until now. The fuel are in, the food are in blue and the fuel are in red. And we can see that there is a huge variation, but again, shows that the blockade was installed on Yemen, or the siege, from 2015, and the Saudi determined what gets in and out of Yemen. This is Jan Egeland. He just landed in Yemen last night, and this is what he said. Just landed in Yemen, empty baggage carousels and deserted arrival hall welcomes us. Sadly, little has improved on arrival since I was here 3 years ago. Yemenis in the capital have been grounded since Sana'a airport was shut in 2016. There is no reason for Sana'a airport to be closed. There are a lot of people. Last year alone, 30,000 Yemeni who needed medical evacuation died because they could not be evacuated. And I don't understand, and there is no reason for Sana'a airport to be closed. This is the same one, but I wanted to show the time that it was last night that he posted this. This is another one from the UN saying Emergency Relief Coordinator reiterates that Yemen is being starved. And that is the absolute truth. Yemen is not starving, but rather being starved. If we look at the air raids in Yemen, I focused on this on 2020. This is from the Yemen Data Project. And the darker the line is, the more airstrikes they had. And you can see most of the northern parts of Yemen had been bombed in 2020. This is Saudi-led attacks devastated Yemen's civilian infrastructure, dramatically worsening the humanitarian crisis. And this is from February 22. So the Saudi, when they targeted a lot of food productions. And in my mind, that actually is purposeful. They targeted a lot of the infrastructure, the structure, especially agriculture, fisheries, healthcare, energy, and other facilities. And this is Yemen Saudi-led coalition systematically targeted bridges. Sana'a is landlocked. So for anything, especially food, medicine, everything has to be brought to Sana'a from areas where there are seaports. They targeted every single bridge that connects Sana'a to the rest of the governorates. Basically, they wanted to even have a stronger siege on Sana'a and cause famine. I'll move now into health. This is from WHO. It said 17.9 million people need health assistance. I'll go over some of the outbreaks, and this data is from the Ministry of Public Health in Yemen. In terms of water and sanitation and hygiene, 20.5 million people lack access to safe water in Yemen. This shows cholera. Like Hassan said, we have over 2 million Yemeni people who have been affected by cholera. Hodeidah, unfortunately, has the highest incidence, and the darker the color, it means they have a higher incidence of cholera. This shows waterborne diseases in Yemen, and you see a lot of it is focused in the northern governorates, but also, like Hassan said, this is where 80% of the population lives. So if we look at dengue fever, we see suspected cases for the years 2018 to 2020. We see that it increased from 27,000 in 2018 to 63,000, almost 64,000 in 2020. This shows vector-borne diseases like dengue and chikungunya and malaria. And we see here that coastal areas are mostly affected by vector-borne diseases. So if we combine both vector-borne and waterborne, you see that Yemen, all of Yemen is experiencing diseases. If we look at respiratory, severe respiratory infections from last year and 2019 and 2020, we see that last winter, they had a huge outbreak of SARI cases. And then we see, and the red line here is fatality. We see in this year in April we had a huge increase in fatality. It's over almost 30%. And this is what I think is related to when COVID started in Yemen. This shows diphtheria cases in Yemen. Again, the numbers continue to be high. Yemen had not had the diphtheria outbreak since 1980 until this war started on the Yemeni people. This is COVID-19, and again, Hassan said we don't have good numbers, and that is absolutely true. The northern governorates are not reporting their cases. They are collecting information, but they're just not reporting it because they don't see the reason for them to report. And we have at least until 222, 2,180 cases reported. But what is important here is the number of deaths, which is 620, which is about 28% of the cases in Yemen that are reported are dying. And I wanted to take a closer look of the governorates that are actually reporting. Hadramaut has the best reporting in Yemen, and they have reported over 986 cases by the end of this month, January. And we see of those, about 1/3 died. What are the people saying about COVID-19? There was a survey, and what people basically said that they are more concerned about food than they are about COVID-19. When we distribute food baskets to families in Yemen, we've been told that they would rather die of COVID-19 than die of hunger, because that will be a faster death. Hassan also talked about Yemen health facilities, functional status. We only have 50% of Yemeni health facilities functioning. The remaining are either partially or non-functioning at all. And I know for sure that at least 4 Doctors Without Borders facilities were hit by Saudi UAE airstrikes. So what has the international community, what is their response to the Yemen humanitarian crisis? So again, I said that the people in the UN are saying the Yemenis are being starved. So what does that mean? What are they doing about it? So this is from World Food Program. Window to prevent famine in Yemen is narrowing. UN agencies warn. We've received a lot of warning. This is from OSHA, and it says there is an important opportunity right now to help Yemen move towards lasting peace. That opportunity will disappear, will be wasted if Yemen tipped into a massive famine. So now we know all of that. This is from Lisa Grande, who was the Yemen humanitarian coordinator. She said, this was in October 15 of 41, major United Nations humanitarian program in hard-hit Yemen has already been reduced. Nearly every humanitarian worker has had to tell a hungry family or someone who is ill that they cannot support him. 31 of 41 programs closed in Yemen last year. If we look at the aid cuts and impact on people who are receiving aid, we see that the number decreased from 15.6, those who are targeted, to 9.5. And then people reached with food assistance also in a decrease from 12.8 million to 8.7. And that was just until April 2020. That number is much higher now in terms of reduction of services. So what is our call to action? I just want to say a little bit, this one slide about Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation. Our mission statement is to increase awareness of the US public and policymakers about the humanitarian crisis in Yemen. And we work with a lot of organizations, including Hassan and organizations like you. We also support relief and reconstruction efforts. We go to places that no other organizations go to, because we work with local volunteers in very hard to reach areas and inaccessible areas. We also hope to facilitate peace activities through our advocacy here, but also our advocacy and programs in Yemen. How does the U.S. come into all of this? This is by Robert Malley, who is now the U.S. envoy for Iran. And he was in the Obama administration when the Obama administration decided to support the Saudi war on Yemen. He basically said America is accomplice to the carnage in Yemen right now, and how America enables the war on Yemen until today. This is from the former UN envoy into Yemen. Hassan mentioned him briefly. I would like to read some of his quotes here. He said, a deal was on the table, the UN Security Council was briefed, and I was in discussion with the Saudi officials regarding the venue for a signing ceremony. That was on March of 2015, just before the Saudis started their airstrike. 2 days later, with no warning, the airstrikes began. From my hotel window, I watched the ruthless destruction of one of the oldest cities in the world. A UN Security Council resolution provided cover for the horrors that followed. Drafted by the Saudi, it was rushed through the US by US, Britain, and France. They expected, for some reason, that the Russians were going to veto it, like they do veto resolutions regarding Syria. However, the Russians did not veto it, and it passed because the Saudi had promised Russia that they would be buying weapons from them as well. So this came on this Friday. What we need are acts and not words. Right now, we're hearing a lot from the Biden administration that they want to put things right because of their, the Biden administration was part of the Obama administration. They are now being given a second chance to rectify the horror they have inflicted on the Yemeni people. So I do hope that we continue to focus on them to make sure that they correct course and at least save the many millions who are still alive today, because a lot of people have already died and we cannot do anything for them. So call for action in terms of what we want. We want, like Hassan said, reverse USAID suspension of aid to northern Yemen, introduce a balanced UN Security Council resolution, increase humanitarian aid to Yemen, and pressure Saudi UAE to pay their fair share in the blockade on Yemen and open all points of entry and support a just peace that is inclusive. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Aisha. We will move on to questions holistically now. I'll be taking them from the Q&A, so y'all don't have to look or worry about looking at that. The first question that we had was, what do you think Thursday's airstrikes might mean in terms of America's stance on the Houthis and relationship with Iran? A little more political.
Aisha, I defer to you, although I could try to take that.
Okay, I'll say something, but I would like also for you to add. Like Hassan said in his presentation, this is actually a bad sign. First of all, it did not get through the proper authorization. We are not at war in Syria. They said this was a retaliation for what happened in Iraq. So it just really doesn't make any sense that if, one country, a group in one country is attacking us, that we go and attack another country. Actually, Pinsky, when Trump did that, she said it wasn't authorized, and she said, Syria is a sovereign country and we shouldn't be attacking Syria. And she is now the White House spokesperson. So I would like to hear from her now what she feels when Biden is doing it. There are a lot of people are saying when Trump did, airstrikes in Syria, everybody who was a Democrat came out against it. But when Biden is doing it, everybody is quiet. We should not be quiet. This does not bode well, not just, because how it concerns the Houthi and Yemen. it just doesn't bode well for a president who said that he is for peace and stability in the Middle East. It doesn't look to me that that's the course he's going to take.
Thank you for that, and I completely agree with everything she just said. I would just add that, it does not help diplomacy in the Middle East, especially with regards to returning to the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal that, Trump administration ripped up. Biden promised to restore the Iran nuclear deal. And, we're in this kind of tit for tat. Iran has said that they don't want to get back in or start talks unless the U.S. starts with sanctions relief. And so rather than, moving forward with that and lifting some of these maximum pressure sanctions, the Biden administration, they've kind of held firm. I still believe that diplomacy can happen. We need to work to isolate more of the, hardline voices like Senator Menendez, Senator Coons, Senator Cardin. I think folks in New York can get, Senator Schumer to be a little bit more vocal for diplomacy. And while the JCPOA and the war in Yemen, they are separate, obviously there's a link between Iran and the Houthis. And, restoring diplomacy with Iran, I think can have a knock-on effect with helping us, resolve the conflict in Yemen. So I think we need to, one, and obviously the point that she made about it not being authorized, that's really important to bring up and keep repeating. Article 1, Section 8 is pretty clear that Congress is the only body of our government that can declare war. The war was never authorized. There was no indication that there was an imminent threat. And not only did it violate our Constitution and our laws here, it also, violated international law because it was a retaliatory strike and, no justification. So we've got to be really cautious, push back on that, possibly invoke the War Powers Resolution to block any further action there, and also work really hard to repeal and not replace the 2001 and 2002 AUMFs for use of military force. So, the Pentagon can't do these things and the executive branch can't do these things without consulting Congress.
Thank you very much for that. Speaking of pushing back, one of the other questions is, do you know which group or groups organizing protests in the US best represents the needs of the Yemeni people and the demands that you've mentioned so far?
Do you mean like on the ground protests and like, because I would just say, just do what Aisha tells you to do. Follow her on Twitter. She's always saying the right things. So.
No, Action Corps does a lot of work, and they have chapters in different places, and also Yemeni Alliance, Yemeni Committee Alliance. They also have, different chapters, and they do a lot of protests. And we did have a day of action for Yemen. We have over 380 organizations that signed on that, which was against the war in Yemen from 28 countries. And it was January 25th. It was planned after the Biden administration was sworn in. And it was amazing. We had a lot of international speakers from parliamentarians in the UK and France and Greece, and we had Rokana also spoke at the event. So there are a lot of organizations that have their own activities, and so I'd suggest that you, if you want more information about these organizations, Hassan and I can share that information with you.
And I would just add on top of protesting, everything she said was great. Lobbying is really important. Direct advocacy with your reps and senators right now, I think it's incredibly powerful and important. So don't forget to lobby Congress directly as well and build those relationships.
Yeah, I just also want to add to that. I spoke with a friend who does lobbying, and he told me something that was fascinating. I'm not sure, he said a call, if one person calls, people in Congress count that like about a few hundred or 1,000 people, that they represent that many people. So you can email, you can, sign petitions, but if you call, apparently that counts a lot because they have some formula that every person that calls is representing this many people. So by calling, you would be counted as a lot more people who care about this issue.
That's a really good point. In the chat, a big short-term call. Aisha mentioned a lot of different advocacy points, but I think in this short, like next 2-week period, filling in the form to call on our reps to ask the Biden administration to restore aid to Yemen is a good call for the next 1 or 2 weeks. So I put that link in the chat. I would just encourage everyone to fill that out and just be public about the need to restore aid.
And ending the blockade. Blockade is really the silent killer in Yemen. When people say about 250,000 people died in Yemen, this is a huge underestimate because we don't have, statistics and registration of deaths in Yemen. So people die, and with the Islamic culture, you bury the dead within a few hours after death. So there is really no registration of the number of deaths. My estimate is going to be a lot more than that.
Thank you very much for that. And we will try to collect those links and then follow up with that in the later email. So something that officials claim legitimizes American intervention is Al-Qaeda in Yemen. And they claim that that makes it important for America to intervene. So to what extent is that valid?
It's not. No. So in the Yemen War Powers resolution, there was a carve out for the 2001 AUMF. So the U.S. Armed Services and Armed Forces could go and do drone strikes on Al-Qaeda targets in Yemen. Now, that is another issue that I completely disagree with. I think, Yemen doesn't need drone strikes. They need humanitarian aid, an end to the blockade, an end to the war. And that's just perpetuating the violence. But in our minds and in what we really had to do for Congress was separate those two wars. Our support for the Saudi UAE-led war, and we were able to make progress there, but we haven't really done the work yet to push back on the 2001 AUMF and repeal that and end that war in Yemen as well. And that's another part of our work here. And that was just the way it happened with this particular piece of legislation. I don't hear that as much right now. I'm not hearing a lot of people saying that justifies our war in Yemen or our support for the Saudi coalition. Members do see them as separate. I'm curious if Aisha has more to add.
Yeah, I've actually advocated against these drone strikes because they create more agony and more anger at the U.S. than they actually help. I used to tell, when I was able to speak to U.S. administration and I met with some of the Obama folks and basically told them that, with the price and the funding that you're putting on this, if you build a hospital and save a mom from dying while giving birth and save a child dying from disease and write on it a gift from the U.S., you will be gaining a lot of the hearts and the minds of the Yemeni people. Drone strikes are only seen as an aggression. They are almost always indiscriminate. They kill a lot of civilians. We've seen evidence that they've killed a lot of children as well. So I like you, Hassan, I'm totally against it. I am optimistic, cautiously optimistic, because the Biden administration said he's going to be looking more closely at this war on terror issue and evaluating it. And I hope that they come up with the conclusion, like many people other than us have wrote about, that it has not worked and it's created more problems than it solved.
Thank you very much. The next question is a little bit different from anything we've had before. What has the environmental impact on Yemen been?
Yeah, that's something we're going to need a lot of work to study the environmental impact. There are a lot of bombs that had been thrown into Yemen. The largest bomb that was thrown into Yemen was actually in my parents' neighborhood that was felt and destroyed windows and doors 5 miles away from where it hit. Based on some conversation I'm having, especially with the cancer center in Sana'a, because Sana'a was hit quite a bit, and also Sada, they're saying that they are seeing a lot more cancer cases. They're also reporting that they're seeing more, kids who are born with malformation. So I think the impact, right now we don't have hard data, we don't have studies that looked into this, but I suspect it's disastrous. It's daily bombing. We have to remember, there are daily bombing of Yemen since March 25, 2015.
Hassan, would you like to add anything to that, or?
No, I think that was good.
All right. And I would actually like to follow up with that, Aisha, by saying that with like the heat in Yemen already, not even if there were no war, Yemen is a place which should be preparing already for the effects of global warming, correct? So not only is there like a net negative, but also there are even more damaging effects because they are not capable of putting in the kind of infrastructure and following up with, like proper wells, et cetera, already. All right.
Sarah, did you, I wasn't sure what the question is.
It was more of a comment than a question, I suppose. The next question is, it sounds like competition over military sales has a lot to do with Russia not vetoing invasion of Yemen. Wouldn't an international agreement between the US, Russia, and other military equipment providers to blockade military equipment supplies be necessary to stop that endless cycle?
Want to go ahead and take a first?
Okay, I'll take a first step at this. So the Saudi have been buying weapons from the US for a very long time. And everything they have is an American and some British. I think there was some publication that I just recently read where I think it's over 80% American and about 20% non-American. So for the Saudi to even have, for the US to even have competition from Russia, it's going to take at least 10 years in terms of ability to replace the weapons that they have. I talked to, someone whom I trust very much at the Brookings Institute, and he told me, for example, all the, airstrikes are happening using American-made jets, right? He said, if we're serious about stopping the airstrikes on Yemen, all we need to do is to stop sale of tires to the jets. They cannot use, tires from Russia or China or even the UK for the F-15 and 16 they fly. So he said, these, jets require that you change the tires every time they fly. And we have daily flights. Imagine how many tires they're purchasing from us. So just by not selling them tires, we grounded the F-15 and F-16, and there will be no airstrikes on Yemen. So it's not something that's going to be simple that, oh, we're going to replace it. It's going to take a long time for any of that to happen. And then the other thing, like Hassan said, and we continue to say, that we are American citizens and we are trying to hold our government responsible for its part in creating the humanitarian crisis in Yemen. And I just also want to add here that the Obama administration agreed to be part of this war so the Saudi will support the Iran deal, the nuclear deal. I just feel that is such, I can't express my anger at that, because they basically gave in the Yemeni people for a deal that was destroyed, when Trump took office. So for them, the Yemeni people did not come into the analysis. or consideration. So it's okay, kill the Yemeni, it's fine as long as you support our Iran deal. Who gave them the authority to take that decision for the Yemeni people? And I'll stop here.
Yeah, and I would just add that the U.S. is about to chair the UN Security Council in March, and we're going to have a lot of ability to, leverage that position, work to try to, if we want, and, if they're hearing from the grassroots and advocates and members of Congress that we need a new, more balanced UN Security Council resolution, we can make some progress if we pick up the UK to support that, if we get Canada to support, if we get Germany, if we get France, and then work diplomatically with China and Russia to resolve any issues there. I think China would probably be supportive of that. I don't see them blocking that for any reason. So, I do think diplomacy, is possible, but we have to really build up support and political space in the U.S. to get there. And I think that's a major job of our advocacy community right now.
All right.
And we know that Italy had decided not to sell any weapons to Saudi. We also know that the EU also passed a resolution that says they will not sell any weapons to the Saudis. So we are seeing countries take that decision on their own.
Thank you for that follow-up. I don't believe there are any more questions in the queue. So we can begin wrapping up now. Do either of you have anything you'd like to plug before my last little spiel?
I just want to say that it really is the work of advocates and individuals that got us where we are today. It's their voices to their Congress people, to the Biden administration, that made them realize that the U.S., the population of the U.S. is against this war. So I think I want to thank everybody who's contributed, whether on signing a petition for Yemen or making a call or going to a presentation or reading about it. I would like to ask that they continue to do this. We are seeing some progress, and we want to make sure that the Biden administration fulfills its promise to us and work towards having peace in Yemen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aisha. And I just second everything that she has said today and in her closing remarks. I definitely encourage people to support the work of Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation at yemenfoundation.org. They're doing some of the most important work in Yemen right now and making sure people have what they need. I think we have to double down on our advocacy. Some people may have said, okay, well, Biden ended support for the war, we can move on to other things. I think now is really a time to double down and make sure, in the short term, we restore aid, put pressure on the blockade. But in the longer term, we support this new UN Security Council resolution, medium to longer term, and, work with Congress to end all forms of support for the war on a permanent basis and not have an executive order that can be torn up. And I hope we keep this conversation going. I know, I'm available to talk to your community anytime. Maybe let's just stay in touch and keep working together. And I just appreciate all that you've done and all that you're going to continue to do.
Thank you. The Socialist Party is incredibly thankful for your time and effort, Aisha and Hassan, and also to the audience. It has been such a pleasure. A week following this webinar, the Anti-War Working Group welcomes everyone to a party meeting where, actually, I think one of y'all mentioned Code Pink before. So we're going to begin a dialogue on US-Saudi relations using political activist Medea Benjamin's book, Kingdom of the Unjust, as a primer. Phenomenal read. If you want more info on that and didn't sign up for updates when you pre-registered, you can email natsec@Socialist Party. It was already put in earlier, but I will put that in now. And we're going to hold a discussion on ways to take collective and or direct action. We'll be providing many of the links that Hassan and Aisha talked about as well. The publisher, OR Books, for Kingdom of the Unjust, is also offering us a special 15% off discount if you use the code SPUSA15 at checkout. And aside from that, just thank you all for coming. And I really hope to see you in our future meetings and discussions. And with that, just solidarity.
I love The Kingdom of the Unjust, by the way. That's a great book. Love that one.